Eli understood that with the children he didn't like, he always pushed them into the lake. So, in such a cold winter, the lake was very dangerous, and Damien was really in danger. So she begged that the boy would remain safe. And so after she finally arrived and managed to grab Damien, the girl asked if his abuser had gone crazy. His subordinates asked what they should do now. The girl continued to shout that she knew he was crazy, but what the hell was he doing with this child now? The interlocutor was shocked because he didn't understand why Eli was yelling at him. He thought that it had never happened before that the girl behaved like this with him. He also understood that, if you thought about it, at some point, instead of bullying other people together, she started to back away. He remembered how the girl had refused him then and didn't want to bully Damien together with everyone. He also remembered how Eli lied that Damien was sick and was in the room at that time so that he wouldn't be scolded. After all, he didn't understand why this girl was so especially kind to this child. For Carson, it was a huge mystery who this child really was. The heroine at this time was telling Damien that she would help him with treatment as soon as they returned to the orphanage. Carson, seeing this, immediately shouted that he hadn't liked any of this from the very beginning. The heroine paid attention to him, and he, in turn, immediately jumped at the boy with his fists. So, in flight, he was shouting that it was because of him that everyone had become very strange. He also asked the main heroine what she was doing that was so incomprehensible now. At that time, the girl grabbed Damien and pushed him aside. So it turned out that Carson flew past them. At the same time, the guy completely miscalculated the force of the blow, and at the moment when the children moved away from him, he immediately flew into the water. At the last moment, he realized he had made a mistake, but it was too late, and he immediately splashed into the cold lake. Carson's subordinates immediately ran to the lake because they were worried about their leader. One of them asked if the boys were okay, could he get up? Another was panicking a lot, asking what they should do in this situation. Suddenly, the main heroine shouted that that's why you need to know your limits. And it turns out that seriously, Carson is a very nasty guy. Then the girl asked Damien if he was okay. The boy said he was fine. After that, they ran together towards the orphanage. The main heroine said that she didn't even see the point in talking to him anymore. Carson and his subordinates were shocked by these words. Damien ran together with the girl, and thoughts didn't leave his head. At the same time, he thought that it was the first time he had seen her so angry, but it was completely unclear to him why she was so angry now. He thought, was it because he was weak and irritated her, or was it all a dream? Suddenly the girl stopped and let go of the boy's hand, at the same time turning to him. And she immediately asked why he had just been standing motionless before. She didn't understand why he didn't resist them at all. The boy stood and listened to all this incomprehensibly, saying nothing. Then the boy realized that it turned out she was really only angry because of him. So, if that was the case, then she also only pitied him and nothing more. Out of sadness, the boy immediately asked if he was really pitiful. He also asked if the girl pitied him and only therefore cared so much. Eli asked in surprise what he was talking about. Damien said that if it was really so, then she didn't need to worry about him anymore. Because it turned out he was already used to such things, so nothing would happen to him. Suddenly, the girl grabbed the boy and turned to him, asking what he was saying. She asked if he thought she had been taking care of him all this time only because she pitied him. Then she said that if that was the case, she wanted to apologize for making him think that. She also wanted to apologize for saying he looked weak, because she should have apologized for that immediately. All because she really didn't consider him weak. On the contrary, she thought he was stronger than anyone and asked him to believe her. The boy was shocked and asked if it was because he wanted to hear it. The boy thought that perhaps it was because he was absolutely sure that she cared out of pity. The words Eli said, that he was strong, didn't suit him at all, because he thought the girl would say he was pitiful, and that's why she cared for him. Because of these thoughts of his, the boy immediately started crying and looked at the girl attentively. The heroine saw this and was frightened, thinking if she had said something wrong. Damien said that he thought he irritated Eli. The girl asked in surprise why he should irritate her. Then the boy started wiping his tears with his hand, and the heroine said that if he rubbed like that, it would hurt. That's why she asked the boy to look at her. He immediately raised his head, and the main heroine said that he should stop crying because he would ruin such a beautiful face. The boy asked then, so it turned out she didn't hate him or what. The main heroine asked why she should hate him at all. The boy said that she had avoided his gaze once. The heroine asked when she had done that and wondered if she had really avoided Damien's gaze. The boy said it happened on the day she talked about heart pain. Eli remembered that it happened at the moment when she saw that he was beautiful and couldn't look at him again. At this, she said that it was definitely not because she hated him. There was a completely different reason for that. Damien immediately burst into tears and said that, as he thought, Eli hated him. But suddenly the girl exclaimed that she would never avoid him again, and the boy asked if that was true. The heroine said they would seal it with their pinkies. They did it immediately, and the girl added that it meant she had promised. At this, she asked if he believed her now. She also looked at the boy's face and was joyful that his tears had finally stopped. Damien said that from now on, he would always hold Eli's hand. He would do this even during meals, and now he would always sit next to her. Hearing these words, the girl smiled and said she agreed to that. Then she suggested that they always hold hands and sit together in the dining room. Then she leaned towards her interlocutor and said that if someone bullied him, he should immediately fight back instead of taking the hits himself. Also, he shouldn't let anyone treat him badly and should immediately ask if something was bothering him and not suffer alone. The boy immediately agreed to this, and they sealed their promise again with their pinkies. The heroine after that said they should go inside. After all, they needed to treat the boy's wounds. Damien walked together with his new friend and thought that her words were indeed true. So it turned out he had found happiness thanks to Eli. He remembered the girl saying that he would have a person who would help him and he could trust him, and that next to him, he would definitely be happy. The boy thought that if this was unhappiness, he couldn't feel so good even while in tears. That's why he wanted to be greedy from this moment on. In one of the places in the northern lands, the Duke was located. People were shouting for mercy, but the man didn't stop and killed all of them. At the same time, he told his subordinate that it was time for them to leave, because it turned out they had only wasted time on useless information. Now they should move to the next area. The heroine, together with Damien, finally reached the orphanage. The girl treated her friend's wounds and said she was finished. She also said that it was time for them to sleep now. At the same time, she saw some strange expression on the boy's face and asked what was wrong. The boy asked her if he could sleep together with Eli. The girl asked if he wanted to sleep with her. Damien said that he just constantly had nightmares and was very scared. The heroine said that the bed was narrow and it would be uncomfortable for them to sleep together. The interlocutor asked if it was really not allowed for him. The heroine at this moment looked at him and thought that nothing could be done. It wasn't that difficult after all. Then she told Damien to lie down next to her, and the boy immediately did so. Then the boy told Eli to lie down next to him quickly. The girl smiled and said she would indeed lie down right here next to Damien. At the same time, she thought that it seemed his mood had really improved. Even though she was a secondary character, she was still glad she could help him. The heroine said that now they were like brother and sister and asked if she was thinking correctly. The boy immediately moved the interlocutor's hand away and said that he was definitely not Eli's younger brother. The heroine said that he was only 11 years old and she was 13. After that, the boy moved away from her, and it was clear he was offended. The girl thought, had he really gotten angry? Because despite being small, he was a strong main hero, and such treatment as a child might be unpleasant for him. So she told her interlocutor that she was joking and asked him not to be angry. Then she said she was going to say that she felt warm because she was sleeping next to Damien. Because of these words, the boy immediately turned around and said he did too. After that, he became embarrassed and immediately hid under the blanket. The girl looked at him and thought he was really a cutie. Then the heroine covered the boy and said it was really late and time to sleep. After that, she wished him good night. The boy in response also wished her good night. That very night, the boy had a wonderful dream where Eli was with him in a rose garden. The girl told him that absolutely everything suited him because he was really so beautiful. The boy thanked her for that and said that thanks to her, he was only happy. The heroine, hearing such words, only smiled further. This morning, Eli was standing over the boy and said that he said he had a good dream, but she was now curious if he was in pain because he had a fever now. Damien, coughing, said that there was nothing wrong because he wasn't in pain at all. Hearing this, the heroine said, "What do you mean not in pain? Your voice doesn't sound like it." So she told him to speak honestly about when he got sick. The boy said it happened last night. The girl asked how that could be and why he hadn't told her anything. At the same time, she scolded herself in her head because she had slept soundly and enjoyed her sleep while the boy was sick. A moment later, Eli asked Tommy about Damien's condition. The guy said the fever was high and he would have to stay in bed for a few days. The girl asked Damien if he heard that because he needed to rest quietly today. Tommy said that with such a high fever, it was stupid not to say anything about it. Damien asked what Eli would do. The heroine said she needed to work, and if she didn't do it, the director would get angry. The boy thought, were they going to be separated from Eli again? The girl noticed that he knew how good she was at work, so she would manage quickly. She would go and make him soup, and he should close his eyes and count to 100. The interlocutor agreed to this and asked her to return quickly. The girl said that of course she agreed to that and added that he was such a cutie. After that, she told Tommy to take care of the boy, she would return soon. He, in turn, didn't answer anything to this and thought that she was really a fox. After some time, the main heroine was in the director's office, cleaning the room. At the same time, she thought that the director needed to leave so she could take the medicine. But she wasn't going to leave at all, and did she have a bad mood today? Suddenly, the director looked angrily at the girl and addressed her. At the same time, she shouted, couldn't she clean up faster? The heroine said she would do it and immediately sped up. At the same time, she thought that if she did something wrong, she might get hit, and it was better to clean outside first. After the main heroine left her, the woman was left alone with her thoughts. At the same time, she looked at the financial reports and thought that despite there being so many children in them, the finances were at zero. Then the director raised her head forward and saw a cabinet there. She immediately thought that to cover the debts, she would have to sell one of the mana stones stored there. Mana stones are minerals that accumulate mana, and people who don't have it use them when using magic. However, the mana stone itself is a precious mineral, and its creation requires a mage. That's precisely why it sells for a very high price. The woman approached the cabinet with these stones and took one of them in her hand. Then, she thought that she had collected them for so long and hard. That's why she would never sell them. After that, the director turned around and looked out the window, and there was the main heroine. The woman immediately thought that if this girl weren't the daughter of a thief, she could easily sell her for a high price and pay off all the debts. At this time, another teacher entered the director's room and interrupted her thoughts. She noticed that, as she had already said, the number of aristocrats wishing to adopt orphans from the Duchy of Schwitz had significantly decreased. The woman said that, as she thought, it couldn't continue like this. Ever since Duke Schwitz started searching for adopted children, the aristocrats stopped adopting them, fearing an encounter with him. The man came to the parents of these children and asked if he had black hair and blue eyes. Then the woman asked Malin if she had leaked the information well. The interlocutor said that was the case because she had spread the rumor everywhere that the son of the dead Duke Clyde was now here. The director said joyfully that she was just great. Malin thought for a moment about the whole situation that had happened, then turned to the director. At the same time, she said that if he deceived him and sold another child and he found out, what would happen to them then? It turned out that it wasn't just anyone, but Duke Schwitz. The interlocutor said that she shouldn't talk nonsense now. It turned out that in any case, Duke Schwitz himself had never seen this child. That's why he definitely couldn't determine if he was real or not. Consequently, the girl had to do what she asked. The interlocutor agreed to this. At this time, the main heroine was standing behind the wall of the office, hearing their entire conversation. At the same time, she thought that Duke Schwitz was finally coming here to save Damien. The Duke at this very time was in one place searching for Damien. The room they were in was battered, and 2 people were sitting in front of the man. And he said it was simply unbearable. Did they really think they could break him with this scent of medicinal herbs? The guy with fear immediately asked the man for forgiveness and said they had indeed committed a mortal sin. The girl sitting next to him screamed for him to have mercy at least just once. And still, it turned out they didn't know he was that very Duke Shiwitz. That's why she asked for mercy for them. He at this very time brought a sword to her throat and was ready to kill her. The subordinate immediately told the Duke to at least listen to these people first, because it turned out, had they come here to kill everyone? Shiwitz said they had committed a sin and wanted to pay with their lives, and given his character, he simply couldn't ignore such a request. Then he told the people that if they didn't want to die, they should answer right now where the child was. The woman thought, did that mean the slave was actually the son of Duke Clyde? With fear, she said the child was in an orphanage. The man asked, what orphanage? The interlocutor said it was an orphanage run by her acquaintance. She just thought it would be better for the child to live in an orphanage than in such a harsh place as this. Strangely, the Duke didn't believe them and immediately swung his weapon. At the same time, he said they were saying such things as if they wished for death. The people thought it was their end and were very scared, screaming at that. But suddenly the subordinate stopped the Duke and turned to him. He asked what had happened. The guy said it didn't seem like these 2 were lying to him, because it turned out he had received one interesting message several days ago. At this time, he was just taking an envelope from his inner pocket and then handed it to the man. He also said that it said the child they were looking for was in a nearby saint's orphanage. Shiwitz asked why he was only telling him about this now, when they had already searched all the orphanages in the empire. The interlocutor said it was only called an orphanage, but in reality, it was a place where orphaned children were gathered to do all sorts of dirty work. It turned out there were many children there who were adopted for money and literally sold. And he wanted to tell him all this after the information was confirmed. At this very time, the man put his sword to his throat and with a cold gaze said he wanted to kill him right here. The guy immediately apologized to the Duke for the situation. Shiwitz immediately turned around and asked the guy if they had really sent the child to the saint's orphanage. That very guy said with fear that it was indeed true, because they had sent the child to the saint's orphanage. After confirmation, the Duke again turned his attention to the subordinate and said he would grant him punishment later. Also, he ordered him to send a message to the orphanage that they were planning a visit right now. The guy said he would do it. Then the man stopped and looked at the people sitting in front of him. At the same time, he said that first, they needed to deal with these 2. Those people began to beg the Duke not to do this, but it was too late, and the man couldn't be stopped. At this time, the arrival was very loud. Near the director's office, there were teachers who were listening to everything. The headmistress was shouting that they were already on the verge of a breakdown, and now sick children had appeared. She also said that who could even feel good after falling into the lake in such cold weather? She thought they were all stupid kids. Soon Duke Shiwitz would arrive. She, in turn, simply couldn't show him a sick, dying child. So, first of all, she should at least give him cheap medicine to show him in better shape than now. Of course, the woman was very sorry, but she would still have to sell at least 1 mana stone. After that, she immediately approached the cabinet where these stones were stored and, opening it, was stunned. At the same time, she shouted, how did this happen, and had the mana stone really disappeared? The main heroine at this time was in the room next to Damien. The boy was still sick and just lying in bed. Eli was wringing out a towel and thought how high his fever was. At the same time, she said the wet towel had become warm, so she would go wet it in cold water again. Suddenly, Damien sat up and asked Eli not to leave because he didn't want to be alone. The girl said that he still had a high fever, but the boy didn't care about that. So the girl sat down next to him and thought that she would probably fall asleep soon, and she would wait a little. At this, she thought that it seemed he had gotten much better thanks to the energy of the mana stones she had stolen from the director. Because the girl didn't know who could have known he would get so seriously ill. So Carson's condition was also quite bad now, but Damien's body was initially weak. And besides, Carson and his condition shouldn't worry her much now. The girl touched the boy with her hand, and he said he felt cool. The main heroine looked at him and didn't understand how one could torment such a kind and innocent child. After all, how could she see Damien as anything but a cutie? After some time, the girl noticed that he had finally fallen asleep. Immediately after that, the heroine left the boy's room and thought she needed to go quickly and then return. She also decided it would be wonderful if she grabbed something light to eat. When the girl left the room, a woman was standing next to her. This woman was the director, who asked what the girl was doing here. The heroine didn't answer, and the interlocutor said she had asked what she was doing here. Eli, in turn, thought, what was the director even doing here? After that, the heroine casually turned to her and said that Damien was sick, so she was taking care of him. And now, she was going to change his water. The interlocutor asked if she was really sure about that. At that moment, she came closer to the girl and pulled out the very mana stone that the heroine had stolen from her. And at the same time, she asked if she was sure about that, and what was this? The girl was shocked and thought that she wouldn't notice if she took one small pebble lying in the corner, but everything turned out not to be like that at all. She told the headmistress she didn't understand what she was talking about. It turned out Carson had been stealing it, and the girl decided to take it. But the woman wasn't listening to her at all and said that now she was even stealing, how could she be so insolent? At the same time, she asked if she was so much like her mother. The girl asked why she was bringing her up again now. The interlocutor smiled and said that it was obvious, after all. Because it turned out she said she would live quietly, that's why she decided to leave her, but in the end, the girl repaid her kindness with theft. After that, the director looked at the heroine angrily and said they should use this opportunity to correct her habit. At that moment, she wanted to hit her, and the girl was already prepared for it. But suddenly, Damien appeared in front of Eli, trying to protect the girl. He told the woman not to hit her. After all, if she hit Eli, he would never just leave it at that. The woman was shocked by such an act of his and asked what this was. She was very curious why the boy had decided to intervene in all this now. Just at that moment, she remembered the words of the woman who was this boy's owner. She had said that he had never tried to hit this child. If she hesitated for even a second, he would attack regardless of who his opponent was. The director was about to say something to him, but suddenly another girl appeared and addressed her. She said a message had arrived and Duke Schuetz would be arriving soon. The interlocutor was shocked and asked how that could be, and so quickly. At that moment, the woman shouted for the girl to make them clean up and they should change all the children's clothes. They should bring all the children with black hair and blue eyes to her office. The teacher said she understood everything. The director said they weren't prepared at all yet. Then she turned to the main heroine and said they would talk later. And it turned out that then she would take responsibility for what she had done. After that, she headed in the other direction, but suddenly the heroine stopped her. At the same time, she asked, "What about Damien?" The woman asked what she meant now. The girl said that Damien also had black hair and blue eyes. The director said, did the girl want her to show Duke Schuetz this child to disgrace herself? Damien at this very time lost his last strength and immediately collapsed to the ground. The heroine at the last moment still managed to catch him. The woman only smiled after that and said a sick child should rest, and she better just take care of him. After that, the headmistress immediately turned around and went to her office. The heroine held Damien in her arms and told him everything would be okay. So it turned out that in any case, she would definitely help him meet his family. After some time, Duke Schuetz finally arrived for a visit, as promised, at this orphanage. The teachers lined up at the entrance, greeting the Duke. The man looked at them carefully and immediately thought. So, this place was far from the city center, completely isolated. That's why you definitely couldn't get here without horses and a carriage. You could say it was a good environment for children, but something still alarmed him. The man immediately asked where the director was, because it turned out he had informed her in advance of his visit. One of the teachers said that since he had contacted them in a hurry, it was too late to inform the director. So, she was on her way here now, and they asked him to wait a little. Then the Duke asked where the child was. The teachers immediately hesitated to answer. At the same time, they remembered what the director had told them to keep their mouths shut. That's why they couldn't answer honestly now. When no answer followed, the man immediately thought it was simply a mess here. After that, he said he had had enough, so he would go and find him himself. The teachers tried to stop him, but it was completely unsuccessful. The Duke, together with his subordinate servant, headed inside. He noticed that small children lived in such a cold place, and it was literally the worst orphanage. The interlocutor said he really thought so too. Then Shuit said that if their words about the Clyde child being here turned out to be a lie, he would immediately get rid of everyone. As they were walking, they accidentally bumped into a girl and she immediately fell. The Duke looked at her, and this girl turned out to be the main heroine. He thought, was this a child? And the girl said it hurt. The man crouched down near her and apologized, asking if she could get up. The girl immediately smiled and thanked him for that, at the same time saying it hurt, so it was hard to get up. The Duke, looking at her, thought she had such a bright energy. After the heroine got up, she asked the man who he was, at the same time addressing him as a very adult person. Shuit's thought, how could that be? He was only 20 years old. The subordinate leaned towards the girl and thought that it seemed she didn't know he was the Duke. Then he wanted to address her, but she interrupted him. The main heroine asked if they had come here to adopt a child. The interlocutors became a little alert, but the Duke said that was indeed the case. The girl smiled and said, was that so? At the same time, she said the children were now gathered in the director's office. The man asked why in the director's office. The heroine asked, because it turned out they were looking for a child with black hair and blue eyes. Well, exactly 5 such children were gathered there. Duke Shuitz, hearing this, said that it seemed the director was indeed here. The subordinate noticed that she had probably decided to stall for time by pretending not to be here, but why was completely unclear. The man said he didn't know, but he already felt bad. Then he thanked the girl for telling him this. The heroine immediately bowed and said there was nothing to thank her for and immediately said goodbye. Then the Duke told his subordinate they should go. He agreed, but at the same time stopped to look after the departing girl. At the same time, he thought she was a strange child, because it was the first time he had seen a person who had collided with the Duke face to face like that and hadn't cried. Then he remembered that it wasn't quite so, because there had been one such person who didn't even blink when looking at the Duke. But that was in the past. After some time, the men finally reached the director's office. The woman greeted them and said she was grateful that he had visited their orphanage. The Duke asked what these children lined up near her were. The woman said these were the children with black hair and blue eyes, just like he was looking for. So, among them, there was definitely that boy. The children, seeing the Duke, immediately started crying, and the woman, frightened, asked what was wrong with them. She also said they weren't usually such crybabies. After that, she tried to calm them down. Shuitz at this time took a stone out of his pocket and held it in his hands. Because he remembered in the report, they told him that his son's mana was here. That's why, if he was here, the stone would definitely react. A moment later, the man thought that, as expected, he wasn't here because the stone wasn't reacting. The woman smiled and asked the Duke what he had decided. The man, in turn, turned to Auntie and said it all seemed like a lie, so he should kill her. The interlocutor told him he would do it now. The children, together with the headmistress, were shocked, hearing such words. The woman, with fear in her eyes, asked the Duke what he was saying. Auntie went to carry out the order, and the headmistress screamed for the Duke to save her, because definitely one of these 4 children was the one they were looking for. The Duke thought about what the woman had said about 4 children, because the child they met at the entrance had said something different. That girl said that if they were looking for a child with black hair and blue eyes, then 5 were gathered at the director's office. That's why the man immediately said one child was missing. Auntie stopped, and the woman asked what he had just said. The Duke immediately grabbed his weapon and headed towards the headmistress, at the same time asking if she would keep pretending until the end. Literally a moment later, the sword was near the director's neck. The Duke asked where the child she was hiding was. He also added that if she deceived him, she would immediately lose her life here. The main heroine at this very time was in the room with Damien. At the same time, the girl thought that, judging by the noise outside, Duke Shuitz would definitely come here soon. Everything was going exactly according to the original, as she wanted, but for some reason, she was still sad. Although for Damien, it was definitely a good event. The girl smiled and took the boy's hand, and after that said he would no longer be sick. The boy looked at her becomingly and asked Eli what she was talking about now. Eli smiled and said she had promised him, after all, so she would definitely help him meet his family. At that very moment, the Duke burst into the room they were in. Damien thought, what other family, and did he even have one? At that moment, he and the Duke exchanged glances with each other, and the boy thought who this man was. The man had arrived with the teachers and his subordinate. Auntie thought he hadn't seen the Duke behave so emotionally since the lady had died. That's why he thought he would never see such behavior from him again. Then the Duke moved closer to the boy to look at him. At the same time, he thought he had heard it was a boy, but he was so thin. At that moment, he exchanged glances with the main heroine. Shiwitz realized this child was the very girl he had bumped into earlier. Damien noticed the man directing his gaze at Eli, so he immediately jumped up and stood to protect the girl. The heroine immediately told the boy he couldn't get up. He, in turn, was exhausted and told the Duke not to look at Eli with such eyes. So, he definitely wouldn't stand aside if anyone at all tormented Eli. The Duke immediately thought this little one was very much like a beast. At the same time, he smiled and asked who he was going to protect with such a body. And while they were talking to each other, that very magic stone escaped and ended up in the Duke's hand. After that, energy burst out of it and illuminated the entire room around. All those present and the children were shocked by what was happening now. The Duke immediately became very happy and thought he had finally found Clyde's son. The boy at this time was losing his last strength and immediately began to lean to the side. The main heroine was very worried about him and immediately caught the boy. At the same time, she begged Damien not to lose consciousness and to come to his senses. Shiwitz at this time crouched near the boy and said there was nothing to worry about now, because it turned out he had absorbed the mana that had been pulled out of him. Consequently, on the contrary, it could help increase his stamina. Then he put the stone in his hand, and the girl felt his temperature drop. The man at this time stood up and said it seemed they had indeed found the child. But now, he really wanted to hear explanations why the child was in such a condition now. He also said that if the answer was false now, they better bite their tongues and calmly accept death now. The woman said that for starters, they would go and call the director with the adoption papers. The main heroine watched all this and thought it was all happening exactly as written in the book. After all, Duke Shiwitz possessed an incredible skill of intimidation and could subdue people with a single word. Auntie addressed his lordship and asked if he hadn't warned him before. After all, as a result, people were more afraid of him than ghosts and asked if he couldn't look with a less cold gaze, because it turned out even the teachers were scared of him and immediately ran away. He also said that it turned out this child had also fallen because of him. In Auntie's imagination, Damien immediately fell after the Duke had just entered. The man said the boy had only fallen because of illness. The interlocutor said that was simply impossible. It turned out that in any case, he always gave a terribly frightening impression. The little Duke definitely wouldn't want him to adopt him and asked if the man had thought about it. The man at that moment picked Damien up in his arms and asked if he had fallen asleep. Auntie asked what he was doing now. The Duke said a sick child still couldn't be left on the floor like that. Then he turned to his subordinate and told him to urgently change the wet towel. He said he would do it now and ran out of the room. Shiwitz put the boy on the bed, and suddenly the girl approached and said she would do the rest herself. The man only watched carefully what she was doing. Then he told the heroine she was acting as if she knew he was looking for exactly this child, but he had come here for the first time. That's why he was curious how she had found out about all this. The girl thought he was testing her now, and she needed to answer correctly. After all, if she made a mistake, she could end up on the street like in the original. But she also couldn't lie, and then she could only say one phrase. So immediately she said she had indeed known all this. With a smile on her face, she said she had overheard the director's conversation. The woman talked about how she asked to spread rumors and sent him a message that a child with black hair and blue eyes was in this orphanage. The Duke sat on the bed and said that then she had intentionally told him there should have been 5 children there. The girl immediately hesitated. At the same time, she thought that if he found out she had approached him on purpose, he would start doubting her. But still, he definitely wasn't one who would notice a slightly clumsy lie. Immediately, the main heroine said he understood correctly. She thought that Damien also had black hair and blue eyes, and he could be the child he was looking for. The interlocutor asked then why she hadn't brought him here immediately where the child was, even though she knew everything. The girl said it was because she wanted him to slowly look around the orphanage and find out everything himself, because he should understand what was happening in their orphanage. Just at this time, Auntie returned, who told the Duke he had brought a towel. The girl continued her story, saying that the man must have noticed himself that the teachers didn't take care of them at all. It turned out they did all the work only themselves. The teachers, in turn, left them every night and went to the casino. It turned out they played gambling games and had fun there. And the girl just wanted the Duke to see for himself the terrible situation that was going on here. The man looked carefully at the girl, and she seemed very similar to a woman he had known before. The Duke said to state her name. The girl said her name was Eli. Then the interlocutor asked what this boy's name was. The heroine said this boy's name was Damien. Suddenly, the headmistress entered the room, addressed the Duke, and said she heard he had called her. At the same time, the woman thought, had this girl told him everything? And if so, he wouldn't let her off the hook so easily. The man said he was adopting this child. The director was surprised and asked what he was saying. The Duke at this moment stood up and looked at the girl. At the same time, he said he also wanted to adopt this child next to the boy. The heroine, hearing this, was simply shocked. Auntie asked the master if he was going to take her as an adopted daughter. The interlocutor said that wasn't the case because he was going to take her as a daughter-in-law. The heroine thought, what daughter-in-law? Because the person who should be connected with Damien was the heroine Ashable. However, there was a plus in this. Now she looked at the boy. He, in turn, was delirious but asked Eli not to leave. At the same time, the girl remembered Damien's question about whether she was taking care of him only out of pity. The heroine took the boy's hand and thought that even for a short time, she had indeed felt affection for Damien. She was actually very joyful at the thought that they would never be parted. Suddenly, the headmistress shouted to the Duke that this couldn't be done. It turned out he couldn't take this slovenly girl under any circumstances. If he wanted to adopt her as his daughter-in-law, did he even know what kind of child she was? The woman thought that if this girl was adopted by Duke Schewitz, it would definitely expose them, so she should prevent it quickly. Then, pointing her finger at the girl, she said that this girl's mother was a thief who tried to steal Count Lation's things, so she meant she was the daughter of a thief. The heroine at this moment remembered the story of the thief that shook the entire empire. In this empire, which was engulfed in war, the thief broke through strict security and penetrated the palace. People said the emperor's precious treasure was stolen. Then the emperor utilized a large number of people to catch the thief, but in the end, couldn't catch her. Soon after, it happened that this thief was captured by Count Lation. Auntie also remembered this story and thought he had heard this woman was hanged right in the county. But now he was surprised because it was the first time he had heard that woman had a daughter. The headmistress, in turn, asked the Duke to believe her word for that very reason. After all, adopting such a daughter-in-law as her would cause huge harm to the Duke's honor. The Duke, in turn, looked at her with a cold gaze and told her to shut up. At the same time, he asked how long he would have to listen to all this dog's nonsense. The director asked what he meant by dog's nonsense. Schewitz said how long would he have to tolerate the chatter of someone no better than a dog. At this, he told Auntie to remove her from here, and the interlocutor agreed to this. The woman only started whining from the heard words. After that, the Duke approached the main heroine and knelt on one knee before her. He told the girl the choice depended only on her whether she would go with him or not. After that, they looked into each other's eyes. After a few moments, the girl said she would agree to it, but she had one condition. Then she asked the Duke to fire the teachers here, and that would be all. The headmistress heard and was shocked. At the same time, she asked what the girl was even saying and how she could allow herself such a thing. Auntie was also surprised because it turned out she was accepting the Duke's offer and even with her own condition. He thought this child was really amazing. The girl, in turn, continued to say that even if she and Damien were accepted into the Duke's family, the other children would still remain here and consequently would continue to suffer. That's why she asked to fire the teachers for their sins and make this place a good orphanage. The main heroine simply wanted the children never to be sold as goods again. The man heard everything the girl said and said he would do so. After that, he stood up and immediately turned to his subordinate. He told him to start revoking the teacher's rights now. Auntie said he understood everything and would start now. The headmistress was very shocked and asked what was happening at all. The subordinates tried to lead her away, but the woman continued to shout for the Duke not to do this. And it turned out he shouldn't believe the words of this cunning, nasty girl. A moment later, the door slammed shut inside, but her voice was still heard. She was shouting that the girl was very stupid, and she wouldn't leave it like that. And so only the main heroine, the Duke, and Damien remained in the room. The girl thought that even though she had asked, she didn't think he would carry out the request so quickly. The man said that henceforth, this orphanage would be as she wanted to see it. Then he said that was why he would ask her again. After that, he reached out his hand to her and asked if she would go with him. The heroine looked at him and thought for what purpose was the Duke really taking her. At the same time, she understood she didn't know the reason, but everything was turning out quite well. If Damien had left just like that, she would have felt uneasy. Until the moment Damien met the real main heroine, she would be by his side. That's why the girl shook the Duke's hand and said she would indeed go with him then. After some time, the Duke's carriage stood near this orphanage. The Duke was also there and said the former director and teachers had been kicked out of here. So, until the new director chosen by the duchy arrived, the people they had hired would take care of the orphanage. They would also replenish the ranks of the orphanage's teachers so there would be no shortage. The main heroine heard all this and immediately bowed to the man, thanking him for it. Also, the girl turned to look at her orphanage. She also thought that finally, the children would live peacefully, and she was really very happy. The Duke looked at the joyful girl and thought it was all really strange. So, the circumstances were too coincidental to be a coincidence, and he thought she was the emperor's puppet. Even so, she didn't immediately accept his offer and fearlessly set her condition. At the same time, even now she was sincerely happy about the orphanage changing for the better. At that moment, he thought it wasn't that he wanted to accept unfounded conditions. Suddenly, he remembered the words of a girl who said that the problem worrying him, she could solve it for him. Also, instead, there was one condition for him to marry her. And that girl was very similar to Eli in his understanding. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by the cry of one of the girls who was addressing Sister Eli. The heroine asked what Betty was doing here. The little girl said if she left, they would never see each other again, because it turned out she had never seen the other sisters who had left. The main heroine said not to worry because she would definitely return. Betty asked if that was true and if she promised to return. Eli said she promised, and it was true. Also, the other children came out to say goodbye to the girl. The Duke at this time didn't want to disturb the children and give them time to say goodbye. That's why he immediately turned and went towards the forest. There he stopped near one of the trees and took out a cigarette. After that, he casually lit the cigarette. And at that moment, he addressed the boy and said that no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't be able to kill a person. Because to start, he would need to take a sword in his hands. He was talking to Damien, who was standing behind one of the trees and hiding. After that, he came out and said he couldn't understand one thing. He asked why he was taking him and Eli specifically. It was completely unclear to the boy what they were even planning now. After that, the Duke said when he returned to the estate, he would need to learn how to talk. Damien added for him to answer the question, why were they really taking him and Eli? The man said that in reality, he wasn't taking him, but merely returning him to his original place. So, he would soon have to understand everything. He would understand everything that had belonged to him from the very beginning. So it turned out that now his appearance was no different from a wild beast. But still, if he returned to his original position, his gaze would change and become harsher. Then, at least, he would be able to protect the people dear to him. Damien hit the tree next to him with his hand and thought that trusting adults was more difficult and scarier than trusting children. Also, he really didn't want to follow him. But still, if this man were the same as his owner, then perhaps Eli would have been in danger when he lost consciousness. In the end, it turned out that because of his weakness, he couldn't protect Eli. The boy remembered that moment when the Duke and his subordinates left the room, and only he and the girl remained. Then Eli told him he needed to go where he was supposed to be. The boy asked with fear if she would go with him. The heroine smiled at him and said that naturally, she would also go with him, because it turned out she had promised him she would always be nearby. And so, remembering Eli's joyful face, the boy thought about the Duke's words that at least he would be able to protect the people dear to him. In the end, it turned out the boy hit the tree with his fist and said they should never make Eli work. The man looked at him in surprise and said what work for a small child. It turned out he shouldn't worry about such useless things at all. Damien said if they tormented Eli, he definitely wouldn't leave it at that. After these words, he turned and went the other way. After that, the Duke thought he was really just like his father, and here even mana stones weren't needed to figure it out. He thought that even if his father was henpecked by his wife, he suddenly changed his attitude towards other people. Still, it would be hard with such a body to show he was Clyde's son. After some time, they all gathered near the orphanage and finally set off for the Duke's estate. The carriage raced through the snowy forest, and at this time, the main heroine was sleeping. After a while, the girl woke up and immediately thought when she had even managed to fall asleep. She also looked to the side and realized Damien was also asleep. So, now it was clearly visible he wasn't sick, and she was glad about that. Suddenly the girl looked out the window and was horrified by what she saw. It was dark there, and a huge flock of crows with red eyes was present. The girl thought, was this place the north? Because it turned out this darkness was as if there was a war. She couldn't even imagine such a wasteland in her worst nightmare. Then the girl thought it seemed the rumors about this place teeming with demons were true. Suddenly she remembered she couldn't do this because she couldn't lose heart. At this time, a crow flew out the window and hit the glass. The girl was surprised, then thought, did that bird really hear her? Because at the last moment, it seemed as if their gazes had met, although she thought that simply couldn't be. After that, their journey on the road continued, but the girl herself was constantly on alert. Finally, they were told they had arrived. The girl together with the boy got out of the carriage and saw the estate where they would live. The heroine thought it was so sparkling, and yet crows were flying there. This confused her, and the boy noticed this and asked Eli what was wrong with her. The girl said nothing terrible had happened to her. At this time, they approached the front door, and the butler was already greeting the Duke. Also, together with the butler, a whole crowd of maids was standing there. The man said they had received the message about his arrival and were ready for it. The Duke said he understood all that. After that, he stopped and said there was something he had forgotten to indicate in the message. The interlocutor asked what he was talking about. The Duke said he had also brought a child, and she would also become his daughter-in-law here. The butler said he understood she would also become his daughter-in-law. But suddenly, he came to his senses a little and asked what he had just said. The heroine thought at that moment that this clearly had great significance, and like the butler, she was also confused now. Then the man stood with a gaze that demanded an explanation of the situation. Auntie, with a smile on his face, said that's how it turned out. Then the butler took a deep breath and said even the night hadn't made any decisions. Hearing all these words, the heroine thought she was clearly unwelcome here. At that very moment, she remembered those times when she was taken to a new family. It happened that one woman took her and told her to call her mom from now on. But one fine day, she asked the girl if she was the daughter of a thief and asked why she hadn't told her. She was shouting that the girl was very insolent after all. When the heroine was younger than now, she was excited each time that she could find a new family. But those were just her stupid thoughts. Now all the girl wanted was to prepare for the future. She didn't need a loving family. Therefore, no matter what, she would endure. The butler at this time said that meant the lady had no maid to help her, and he should have warned him in advance. The girl thought, what lady and maid were they talking about now? She immediately said she could handle everything alone. At the same time, she would be quiet, and she didn't need other people's help. It turned out that even in the orphanage, she did all the difficult work herself unnoticed. The girl thought she really didn't want to be considered a bothersome child needing someone's help. The Duke at this time turned to the butler France to do something about it. The man said his lordship shouldn't worry because he would take care of everything. At the same time, he looked carefully at the girl. While they were discussing all this, one of the maids approached Auntie and told him something interesting. Then the knight turned to the Duke and told him that his vassals and relatives from the collateral line were waiting for him. Schuetz asked what he had just said. Had the rumors already leaked? The interlocutor said that might indeed be the case. Then the man suggested that since there were many eavesdropping ears, naturally, there were also many gossiping mouths. At this time, he already imagined all these people asking if he had really found Clyde's son. Then the man told his subordinate to convey to them that he would rest a bit and then see them later. Then he turned to France to prepare rooms for the children. The butler said he understood everything. After that, the Duke together with the knight went about their business. The butler pointed the children in the direction they should go, and he would escort them. After that, they headed there together. The main heroine walked along the corridor and reflected on this entire conversation. She understood that the vassals and collateral line were precisely those who threatened Damien's future. Although Duke Schuetz had only adopted Damien in the distant future, they would actively develop a sense of connection. The girl understood that all this could only mean that Damien's trials were still not over, because this was literally just the beginning. She, in turn, couldn't bear to see her Damien's life go wrong again. People were just discussing the news that Clyde's son had arrived. One of them hit the table and said it was impossible because he had found the child. But even if that were so, could he have survived then? Another man said on the development of Peppers he had seen it with his own eyes. The interlocutor said there was definitely some trick here. To be honest, mana stones could be easily replaced. In any case, he was aiming to take the top from the backward Clyde clan and the collateral line again. Besides all this, he had brought the child of the deceased Duke Clyde into the Schuetz family. So, those who ruled the top for 11 years were precisely their Schuetz clan. But was it right to return all his authority to a child who had been wandering who knows where? The man immediately stood up and said they had to find a way. Another person at the table said their thoughts were indeed similar to the Viscount's. At the same time, he asked who could defeat the Duke. If he could break his will, he would have done it before anyone else. The first person who was shouting all this thought, what were these impenetrable old men? So it turned out they would lose everything in vain, and was that all they could say in this situation? Suddenly, the Duke entered the hall where the men were discussing all this. He asked those present what they were talking about so much. It turned out his ears were even ringing from it outside the door. The most active man discussing all this said the Duke had finally come. His lordship said it seemed they absolutely wanted to exchange a few words, so he had personally visited them. At the same time, he carefully examined the entire hall and said there was no need to waste time on other conversations. Still, as they all could have heard, he had indeed found Clyde's son. One of the men at the table smiled and asked to accept his congratulations. Then he asked what his name was. The Duke said this boy's name was Damien. The interlocutor said he understood, and it was indeed a brave and cool name. Then he added that from now on, it turned out he would be the head of the Clyde family. Hearing these words, Schuetz thought they were openly drawing a line between him and Damien. He understood that if the boy inherited the Clyde family name in a state where he was nothing, they would devour him at any moment. Of course, the same could be said for the vassals of the Clyde family and the collateral line relatives. Then the Duke looked at all of them and said that, by the way, Damien had a very smart spouse. So, he thought she would be useful for the family and took her with him. Consequently, he would give the children an education as his heirs. After all the heard words, the people present simply had no face left, because they were very shocked by the information the Duke had given them. One of them tried to say something, but the man interrupted him. With a smirk on his face, the Lord said that for the children to worthily bear the Clyde name, it meant he would make every effort to support them. Several men present immediately stood up, and one of them said, "What was the Duke saying?" Another said it was simply impossible. He was shouting why they should raise these children. The Duke said he had had enough of all these conversations. At this, he said he was adopting these children, and when the time came, he would marry them. The people were even more shocked, hungry to hear the word marriage. After all, no matter how young the age, if an engagement took place, the person was recognized as a full member of the family. Moreover, if the child chosen by the Duke himself married Damien, then the top of the Clyde family could no longer be taken away. The man thought that it turned out, having heard that Clyde's son had been found, they must have been planning to either throw him out or push a girl from their family onto him. Consequently, it turned out he simply couldn't leave it like that. Then the Lord turned to the people present and asked them to bless him for this, because they were the ones who had sworn to give their lives for their family, and they would follow his will. One of the men present was very shocked by what was happening now and what Shuitz was saying. At the same time, he thought he knew the Duke wouldn't leave him alone so easily, but he didn't think he would choose a partner for marriage. So it turned out he had to find another way. The main heroine at this time was shocked and at the same time examining the room they had been given. The girl thought, did this room really belong to them? The chandeliers looked like jewels, and she felt like biting them. Suddenly she turned to talk about it with Damien, but he wasn't there. Only a few maids were standing there who said the young master had left with the butler, so they had gone to wash up now. The main one among these maids said that from this day on, they would be nearby to help Lady Eli. Then she introduced herself and said her name was Rona. So, they would do everything possible to make her stay here comfortable. After that, they all bowed and said they were very pleased to meet her. The girl in response also bowed and greeted them. Rona said that importantly, Eli could speak completely freely. The girl asked if that was really allowed. At the same time, she thought they were going to help her, and she had never spoken to adults informally. Also, being called lady burdened her a little. Rona said the lady would soon get used to all this. Then she turned to the other maids and told them to greet Lady Eli too. One of the girls said her name was Ivana. The next girl was May, and the last was Ash. If it was hard for her to remember all the names, she could address them as was convenient. The heroine thought learning the names wasn't such a difficult task. Then she named their names and said she had remembered them all, so please love and favor her. The maids, noticing this, were happy and thought what a kind lady she was after all. The girl looked at this and thought that perhaps they had misunderstood, thinking she was of noble origin like Damien, because she didn't understand why they had such faces. Rona said that since they hadn't finished with the introductions, she should follow her. So, the girl had come from afar and was probably tired, but first, they would help with taking a bath. The girl thought in surprise, how would they help her take a bath? After that, they all indeed headed to the bathroom, and the heroine was now having her hair brushed by one of the maids. The girl thought, what should she do? She was very confused. After all, she didn't want to show them her scary and undeveloped body. However, if she hesitated, they would start despising her, and first, she needed to get used to all this. Ash at this time saw the girl's cute radiance and immediately smiled. The head maid noticed her about this, and the girl apologized. She said it was all simply because Lady Eli was very cute. Ash asked if the lady had a scent she often used. The girl asked what scent, because she knew nothing about scents. Warm water was enough for her. It turned out the water in the orphanage was too cold. After that, Eli thought she really didn't know the names of scents, so she answered honestly. And now she thought, was that the right answer at all? Then Rona said that until Lady Eli found a scent she liked, they needed to try hard. The heroine thanked her for that and said not to bother them, she would try hard. Suddenly, the interlocutor said she would say it a little differently, so they would try even harder until she stopped bothering them. These words struck the girl, and she asked what the woman had just said. After a while, night fell, and the main heroine was in her room. At the same time, she thought that although there were those who helped her, it took more time than when she bathed alone. So, thanks to all this, she could use warm water and fragrant soap. Now the girl really understood what lightness and freshness meant because now she didn't want to leave here. At this time, the girl rolled over in bed towards Damien. The boy immediately became alert, and the girl asked him why he was so surprised. Had something happened? The interlocutor said nothing had really happened, he was just scared. The girl looked at him carefully and realized Damien had gotten a haircut. She thought it seemed he was uncomfortable and shy because of his short hair. The boy, in turn, thought that Eli had really become prettier, and now his heart wouldn't stop pounding. Consequently, it turned out they were thinking about completely different things. The main heroine touched the boy's face and asked if he had heard the butler's conversation. The boy asked regretfully what conversation she meant. The girl said Rona had talked about them becoming a couple. At the same time, she remembered how the woman said the Duke had told her that Lady Eli and Lord Damien would be engaged. The boy asked what it meant to be a couple. The heroine said becoming a couple meant they would love one person their whole life. The boy didn't stop being surprised and asked what this love was. The girl hesitated with an answer and thought how to really explain it to him. Then she said she really didn't know it herself, but her mother had told her some words. She said that when a person falls in love, it tickles in the stomach and feels like the whole body is burning. Also, the heart beats very hard. Hearing all this, the boy recalled all those moments they had lived through with Eli. At the same time, he was very surprised and thought, did he really love Eli then? The girl, in turn, sat and thought it was difficult for her to explain it all correctly indeed. Suddenly Damien got hiccups, and the girl asked what had suddenly happened to him. The boy said nothing terrible had happened because he was just a little suddenly scared. The main heroine moved closer to him and said that if you held your nose like this, the hiccups would stop. He, in turn, started moving away from the girl's hand. The heroine thought that he had been suddenly told they would be a couple, and Damien must be very confused now. The girl thought she had told the boy she would help him find a family and had indeed become his family herself. So, she had such a feeling as if she had striven for this by any means necessary. Lots of money, and the house had everything in abundance. At that moment, she touched her finger to her interlocutor's cheek. The girl said it seemed Damien was getting hiccups again. He asked why she thought so. Eli said his face was so red as if he was about to explode. The heroine asked if he was tired of her, so he had a fever. At the same time, she thought that, however, a person should know their limits. So, someday the people here would find out she was the daughter of a thief. The interlocutor said he was just quite hot. The girl continued to think that even if Duke Schuitz had brought her, she couldn't be sure of her future. That's why she should be as modest as possible. After that, Eli asked if she should move away from him then because the bed was really so wide. The boy said he didn't want that. The heroine said, but he had said he was hot. But the interlocutor added that nevertheless, he didn't want that. The girl looked at his frightened face and asked Damien if he was afraid of mosquitoes, like last time. The boy said that was indeed the case, and he was scared because it was an unfamiliar place to him. The heroine thought this was different from the story where he quickly got used to the Duke's estate, and she felt very sorry. Then they snuggled together, and the girl said she understood everything. After that, she asked if even if it was hot, could he fall asleep because it would be less scary that way? The boy turned and hugged her, at the same time saying yes. The heroine after that thought he had become even cuter. Then she told the boy to close his eyes and wished Damien good night. Then the girl mentally asked her interlocutor if a lot had happened today. Although he had had difficult days until now, in the future, he would be several times happier than the pain he had experienced. That's precisely why tonight and tomorrow night he would have no more nightmares. The girl wished for the Milky Way to fill his dreams. After that, snuggling together, they finally fell asleep. At night, one of the men who had been at the meeting with the Duke asked his subordinate if he had found out anything. The subordinate said that was the case. The girl brought by the Duke was a commoner, and they said her deceased mother was a famous thief. The man asked if she was really a thief. The interlocutor said that was indeed the case because he must have heard of her. That story about the woman who stole His Majesty's treasure. The man stood by the window and immediately thought that a boy wandering who knows where and the daughter of a thief were indeed a good combination. Then he told his subordinate he was great, and it was excellent information. And immediately after that, he threw him a bag of money. Then he said he really got information quickly, and he always admired him. The interlocutor took the money and said he was really exaggerating, and after that, he said he was leaving then. Now the man stood alone and thought he needed to report this to His Majesty quickly, although it simply couldn't be that the Duke really didn't know about this. Moreover, if the Emperor learned this truth, the property of the Duke and Clyde could be confiscated by the imperial family. Now he thought how he should really behave in this situation, but suddenly he thought of something. At the same time, he understood that in this way, he would win in his favor and get rid of this girl. After some time, the main heroine was sitting in her room in front of the mirror. Also, Rona was next to her, asking Lady Eli if she was very tired. The girl said it was visible she was a little tired still. The woman asked her to endure a little more. So, today was the day to introduce her to the elders and vassals. The other maids at this time were choosing dresses and asking which one would suit the young lady best. After a while, the heroine was fully ready for the meeting. She was already wearing a luxurious dress and had all the procedures done. The girl looked at herself in the mirror and thought she hadn't known she was so pretty when dressed up. At the same time, she was shocked, and the maids next to her said Lady Eli was really very cute. Rona said as soon as Lord Damien finished his preparations, he would come too. Then she asked the girl if she would wait for him in the bedroom. The heroine said that of course, that was the case, and she would wait there. After that, the girl sat on the little sofa and thought it was very exhausting when people took care of her. At the same time, she remembered the words of the maid who said the lady's skin was so white it seemed if you touched it, powdered sugar would spill out. Then the girl sat and thought when Damien would finally come. Suddenly there was a knock on her room door, and Rona immediately went to open it. Then the woman asked the maid what had happened. The interlocutor apologized and said Viscount Corbino wanted to greet Eli. The girl heard all this at that moment and thought it seemed he wanted to find out who she was before the official meeting. Rona said the lady wasn't fully ready yet. The man, in turn, didn't stop and still entered the room. At the same time, he looked at the girl and asked how she wasn't ready because, in his opinion, she looked just perfect. Then he smiled and asked the girl if he had been rude to her. The heroine looked at his smiling face and thought this was the look of a person who didn't want to wait his turn. Then the girl said that of course, the Viscount was right, and she had almost finished her preparations. The man said, was that so? So it turned out he had dropped by surprisingly just in time. He also added he hadn't come empty-handed to get acquainted with her and had brought a rare little thing. Another maid also entered this room and brought a box with jewelry. The Viscount said this was a mineral called Blue Hope, so it was a mineral that could only be obtained on their land. Then the man looked at the girl with a sly smile and thought that if she really was the daughter of a thief, she could easily be caught stealing. Then the Viscount said if the girl had Blue Hope, she could easily use magic, because it turned out that for her, it was also really very important. After his words, the Viscount looked at the maid Rona and told her to leave, because it turned out he needed to talk with the lady in private. The woman wanted to object to him, but he said, did she think he would do something absurd now? The maid before leaving looked at the girl and then left the room. The girl, in turn, sat smiling and nothing foretold any trouble. The man, in turn, looked to make sure no one was left in the room except him and his maid. The main heroine at this time was looking into the box and thought it was truly a beautiful stone. So, its color was exactly the same as Damien's eyes. Suddenly, the Viscount told the girl to stop gaping at it. He immediately changed his expression, and it was clear from him that he was plotting something bad. At the same time, he said this was definitely not a thing the girl could get. She immediately understood something was wrong and asked what he meant. Corbino continued to say that he was generous and so would allow her to look at it as much as she wanted. So, as soon as she had looked her fill, she would send it back through his maid. Then he turned around and said he was excusing himself on that. At the same time, he added they would see each other later. The girl wanted to address him, but he literally ignored her. After that, the heroine thought, was this some kind of one-sided game? The maid approached the girl and said that even though he said so, this mana stone was chosen for the young lady by the Viscount personally. Then she asked how this thing was, and if she wanted to look at it more. At this time, the maid Rona entered the room. She told Lady Eli that she had talked enough because they needed to go all because Lord Damien had already arrived. The girl asked in surprise if he had really already arrived because then she needed to go quickly. After that, she immediately ran to the exit, and the maid holding the jewelry thought this couldn't be allowed. If she left like that, it would be bad. Immediately, she remembered that recent conversation with the Viscount when he explained everything to her. Then the man told her that at the right moment, the girl should put the mana stone in Eli's pocket and leave. So, she was uneducated, so she definitely wouldn't notice anything. Rona asked if the Viscount had done any strange things to the girl. The heroine said everything was fine. At this time, that very maid took the mana stone and thought if not now, she would never be able to plant the stone on her. Then she approached closer to the girl and said, "Lady Eli, then I will also go on this." The heroine looked at her and immediately agreed. The maid thought she should act right now. At that moment, she pretended to trip and directed her body towards the girl. At that moment, with a simple movement, she took out that very mana stone and tossed it into the girl's pocket. At the same time, she thought, excellent, because she had successfully placed it. After that, the girl immediately collapsed to the ground but didn't touch the heroine. Rona approached her and asked Lady Eli if she was okay. Then she examined her and asked if the girl had hit herself. The heroine said, as the woman could see, she was completely fine. Then the interlocutor said she would definitely reprimand this maid for everything. That very girl sat and thought if Eli had noticed, she had planted the stone. Rona added that May was outside and would escort her. The girl said that was so, but first, she needed to do something. After that, she approached that maid lying on the floor and said she had fallen and probably got her clothes dirty. That girl said with a start that she was really fine. The girl immediately smiled and said, "Then thank God." And so it turned out she could leave calmly then. After some time, the main heroine together with Damien and the Duke were already at the meeting. The girl bowed to the people and said she greeted them for the first time. At the same time, she introduced herself and said her name was Eli. Also, the girl looked forward, but no one was listening to her there at all. The men only discussed that she didn't even have a last name, and the Duke of Clyde's bride was a commoner. People literally didn't understand what was happening here at all. The girl thought their reaction was softer than she had thought. Damien, seeing this, wanted to say something. But suddenly the Duke stopped him and whispered if he had forgotten what the man told him last time. Because it turned out until he regained his former position, he shouldn't fuss and should behave quietly. The girl saw Damien and asked if he was in a bad mood. The boy said there was nothing like that in this. Suddenly, someone addressed the Duke, and he immediately looked there. And that person who addressed him was the Viscount. He said he apologized, but could he look at something? His lordship said it seemed this was urgent since it wasn't even brought up for discussion. The interlocutor said that was so because he was talking about the blue hope stone he had reported to him about earlier. So it was finished yesterday, and so the Viscount hoped the Duke would look at it. The man took a deep breath and then said he had brought it after all. At this moment, Corbino turned to his subordinate and told her to bring it. Suddenly the girl approached him and said she wanted to tell him something in his ear. She whispered something to him, and he exclaimed with a rupture, what was she saying now? The Duke heard all this and asked his interlocutor what had really happened. He said they were saying the blue hope stone had disappeared. Those present started discussing how this blue hope had disappeared because who was even watching the stone? The maid said it was she who was watching it. The Viscount ran up to her and grabbed her, at the same time saying how she was even watching it. Then he asked when she had last seen it. At that moment, the girl with fear said that actually, not long ago, she had shown blue hope to the young lady, pointing at the main heroine. But at the same time, she couldn't get it back. The man asked if she was talking about that time when they came to greet the lady. The interlocutor said that was so because it was that time when the Viscount calmly let her admire it. After that, Corbino turned around and apologized to the Duke for telling him this, but he had heard something. Then he said probably everyone here had heard the story of the thief who broke into Count Lation's castle. Consequently, it turned out that that young lady, or rather, this girl's mother, was that very famous thief. One of the people in the hall asked what he had just said. Was she the daughter of the thief who broke into Lation County? After that, they turned to the Duke and said that after hearing this, they couldn't just leave it at that. The Duke, in turn, immediately started thinking about this whole situation. He thought that when they suddenly started talking about Blue Hope, he thought it was just empty chatter, but now everything was falling into place in his head. And while he was thinking about all this, someone turned to the Duke and said that was why, if the man didn't mind, he would like to search this girl. The heroine was surprised and asked what he was saying. The Viscount bowed and asked the Duke for this favor. The girl with fear said that her mother really was a thief, and that was true. But still, she definitely hadn't touched anything. Corbino said then they would check it. Damien looked at Eli, thinking what he should do now. The girl, in turn, agreed to the Viscount's proposal, but at the same time, she said if he found nothing, he should apologize to her. Corbino said that was really very insolent, but he agreed to her conditions. After that, he again turned to the Duke and asked for his permission. The Duke said if he had already received her permission, was his permission even necessary? Then the interlocutor thanked him for that. That very maid who had planted the stone on the girl approached her to check. At the same time, she apologized and started examining her. And at that moment when she reached into the pocket where she had put the stone, she was shocked because she didn't find it there. Then she turned to the Viscount and said there was nothing there. He said with a smile on his face that was right, there was nothing. But suddenly he caught himself and asked what nonsense she was spouting. Then he asked if she had really searched all the pockets well. The interlocutor said she had really examined everything thoroughly. Corbino didn't believe it and immediately ran up to the girl, told the maid to step aside because he would search himself. After some time, he said with an incomprehensible look, how could it not be there? At this very time, the people in this room started discussing all this. They whispered that it turned out then the girl hadn't stolen anything, but Viscount Corbino was clearly looking for something. The man got even angrier from this and immediately called the girl a dirty little brat. After that, he grabbed her and started shaking her, asking where she had hidden it. At the same time, he shouted for the girl to talk about it quickly. But suddenly, his hand was grabbed with enormous force by the Duke. At the same time, as always, with his cold gaze, he said he was rampaging because he couldn't find anything even with his eyes open. The heroine was surprised at this and thought she couldn't even have imagined Duke Schewitz would help her. Then the Duke added that, in his opinion, the Viscount looked more like the one who had done the mischief. At the same time, he asked what he thought, because was he mistaken? Corbino immediately hesitated and panicked, at the same time telling the Duke that it wasn't like that. So, he was just worried about him. He also said it was just an obvious situation, and there was no other way but to doubt her. The Duke smiled at him and said that made sense. Then he said that then, following the same situation, he should suspect the Viscount. That's why he turned to Auntie to do everything. The guy immediately said he would do everything. Auntie approached the Viscount and apologized for what he would do next. Corbino, in turn, said to check him thoroughly, how clean he was. At the same time, he was completely confident it wasn't on him. After a thorough inspection, the knight indeed found the stone and pulled it out. Then he turned to the Duke and said a stone had been discovered in the Viscount's pocket. Corbino was shocked and thought why it was there. After that, he stood up and told the Duke he knew nothing about it, and it was really true. He begged him to believe him because he was really innocent in this situation. The main heroine smiled and thought it was just perfect that Blue Hope was such a light stone. Analyzing the situation, one can understand how this very interesting situation occurred. So, first, the deft daughter of a thief uncovered the maid's scheme. Because the moment the stone ended up in her pocket, she felt some heaviness. When the maid was checking the girl and wondering why it wasn't there, the heroine carefully pulled out the Blue Hope placed in the maid's pocket. Then the retrieved stone had to be placed in the Viscount's pocket. and the heroine used that very moment when he was distracted and checking her pockets. In the end, it turned out this situation was called Clever Eli. Now the girl thought it was good the maid and Viscount acted as she wanted. It's cold in the north, so thick clothing fit well into the plan. Precisely because of all this, those two didn't notice the blue hope. After everything was cleared up, the Duke with a smile turned to Viscount Corbino. Then he told him that regardless of who he was, payment for lying had to be made. That's why he told his knight to take him away, and his maid too. At that moment, the Viscount started begging the Duke to ask him just once more because he had made a real mistake. But the man didn't listen to him, and the knight immediately took him away together with the maid. And then these people faced their end. The main heroine heard all this and now thought that no matter what mistake a person made, it was very difficult to see their end. But still, if he hadn't taken measures, he wouldn't have been able to protect them. The Duke turned to Eli and asked what condition she had set for them recently. The girl said she had said they would have to apologize to her. The Duke looked at the people and said they had all heard. So, they had ears too. Those very men didn't want to do it, but they immediately knelt. Then they asked the heroine for forgiveness and begged for mercy, because it turned out they had acted very disrespectfully towards her. The Duke told them it would be better to decide their fate right now, but Auntie wasn't there either, so let them talk after the meeting. The people, because of such a lenient step, immediately thanked the Duke for his kindness. Schewitz told those people who disagreed to sit back comfortably, and they thanked him for that. Also, he turned to Damien and Eli and told them to sit down too. The girl together with the boy immediately did so. After a little while, their meeting finally began. The Duke said they could now return to the matter. So, as he had said earlier, he planned to marry these two children. One of those present raised his hand and told the Duke that nobles were still forbidden to marry commoners. Schewitz said he really knew all that, that's why he had gathered them all here. And he had gathered them all here only to find a family that would adopt Eli. The heroine was shocked and asked what he was saying. Those present were also shocked, asking what he meant by adopt. Then the man asked which family was better after all. The main heroine continued sitting in shock and thought how nobles could even adopt the daughter of a thief. The Duke said if no one volunteered, he would have to act completely differently. He turned to Eli and told her to choose. The girl asked if she herself, and the interlocutor said she would bear that family's name, so she should choose it. The heroine immediately became confused with her answer. At the same time, she immediately remembered what had happened with families before. When she came to one of the families, that woman said, should they make this girl their daughter's maid, because it was a disgrace to their family? It was unclear what one could even talk about with a child who wasn't on their level. Other children told their father that no matter how much they wanted to accept her, they were ashamed to deal with someone of such origin. That's why the girl was always alone, but suddenly one day, a mother approached her. She said that although it was hard for the girl, she should endure a little. All because she was a child who would be loved wherever she went. Then she asked, hadn't she told her with what love she was born? In the empire where the events of this story unfold, there were two dukes. The first of them was Duke Schewitz, who was the lord of the battlefield.